Welcome to the session 4 of Development Economics. Today's unit is titled The Meaning of Poverty, and we have Professor Upali Vidanapathirana of the Department of Social Sciences, Open University of Sri Lanka, to take you through this unit. To begin this unit, let me ask Professor Vidanapathirana, is poverty a serious global issue?
Yeah, I think this is linked with what we discussed in the previous session on the development gap, where we saw large number of countries in Latin America, in sub-Saharan Africa, and in Asia that are crowded by, or there are so many large number of countries that are poor, that are developing, that are underdeveloped. In terms of numbers, the absolute numbers, the relative numbers. In terms of relative numbers, it says that $1 per day poverty line is employed to measure the relative number. It says about billion of people in the world are poor. That means of 7 billion, 1 billion of the people do not earn $1 per day to lead a good, reasonable standard of living. And these are PPP dollars. Then you have another measure called $2 per day per person. If you use the $2 per day per person, it goes up to about 2.7 billion, which is about almost 3 billion people are poor. So that shows that the extent of poverty in terms of relative numbers are very high. When they are high in relative numbers, it also means in absolute numbers, you multiply by 7 billion, you get the absolute numbers of poor people in the world. And the second aspect, as we discussed even earlier, that most of these people are living in the underdeveloped world, in the poor countries which are in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So if you look at the countries where you have the lowest incidence of poverty, you might be surprised to hear that in 2008, poverty has been lowest in China, and also the country that is not in existence almost at the moment, which is Libya, where the poverty has been the lowest, right? But some of the other countries, it has been more than 50% of people. Incidence of poverty has been more than 50%. So to that extent, income poverty is a serious problem. When income poverty is a serious problem, you would see other aspects of poverty also are serious. We looked at the other aspects. We said they don't have shelter. We looked at the other aspects. They don't have nutrition. We look at the other aspects. They are prone to diseases. We look at other aspects. They are illiterate. They are short. They are, skinned people. So these are some of the other aspects of poverty that you see in the world. And the world, you have about closer to 4 billion people in the world are poor. So it's a globally serious issue.
Right. Which brings me to the next question. What are the features of poverty?
Yeah. Now, I think there is an overlap because we said some of the features. Now, one big problem of poverty is, or we call it manifestations of poverty, they don't have food. And when they don't have food, they have hunger. And then when they don't have hunger, there's famine. So, and when there's hunger and famine, that crosses the limit of moral values, the shame, right? You can steal, you can do anything when you don't have food to eat. So this is one manifestation. They don't have shelter. They live in an environment which is deplorable. They don't have clothes. They wear old, dirty clothes, and they are shabbily dressed. They are illiterate. They don't have schooling for children, and as a result, you see when they don't have schooling, when they are illiterate, their capacity to produce the so-called human capital is not present. And also there is low income, there is no social security, there is no income security, there is no political security because they are poor. They also have large families, surrounded by diseases and deaths. There are a lot of old women and children suffering the most in most of the poor countries. So these are some of the manifestations of poverty.
Yeah. So what are the main approaches to poverty?
Yeah. This takes us to an important issue of measurement of poverty. The approaches are there to measure poverty. You have some approaches which are known as monetary. Then you also have capability approach, and then you also have another approach known as exclusion or social exclusion approach. The monetary approach is about income or expenditure. It is about, in terms of, say, income, the main problem of poverty characterization is low income or lowness of income. And I think we use the international poverty line, the dollar per day, is one of the measures to see how people are poor in terms of income. And you also have the other aspects like, the expenditure. You don't have sufficient, adequate amount of money with you to secure your entitlements like food, medicine, houses, shelter, clothes. So these are some of the other related aspects of monetary outcomes of poverty. This leads to not having basic needs. And in this approach, one important contributor is known as FGT. The names are Foster, Greer, and Thobeck, who developed a measure called Poverty Index or Head Count Index, which tells you about how many head counts can be found, like in a classroom of 40 people, how many people are poor. You count the heads of people who are poor if you can measure them. And in terms of dollar per day, it has been found that sub-Saharan Africa has roughly about 300 million people earning less than $1 per day. South Asia, 350 million people earning less than $1 per day. And East Asia, which is East Asia and Pacific, with China, it's roughly about 200 million people. So this is $1 per day. If you raise it to 1.5, 1.25, if you raise it to $2 per day, if you raise it more and more, you'll see more people becoming head count poor, because with the measure raises, those who are poor, the number increases. That's the dilemma, the irony of the counting that we do.
Yeah, in your discussion, you mentioned the monetary approach.
Yeah.
Could you tell us, in terms of the monetary approach, who is poor?
Yeah, in terms of monetary approach, the poor people are those people who do not have the minimum threshold income to spend on their basic requirements. Now, this threshold minimum is, as I said earlier, they must have a threshold minimum to spend on their food, to spend on their clothes, to spend on their shelter, to spend on their health requirements, and also perhaps to spend on the educational expenditure of their children. So if you don't have them, whether it is $1 per day or whether it is any other head count measure, these numbers will tell us that these people are poor.
Okay, let us discuss head count poverty.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what head count poverty is?
Yeah, it's an interesting measure which is used mostly by the national economies. Now, Sri Lanka or India or any other country, they use a national measure known as head count index, which is based on the calorie norm. It is presumed, or it is computed, that an average person requires something like 2,100 kilocalories or up to 2,350 kilocalories per day to lead a healthy, reasonable life. And if you don't have money to purchase those units of kilocalories, and they are poor. And those people who belong to that category are known as the basic head count. You can extend it to cover those people who don't have food kilocalorie requirements, plus the other basic needs such as health, fuel, shelter, house rent, schooling expenses, etc., etc. And then you have a extended poverty threshold, which will tell us how many people are poor.
Yes, Prof. Vidanapathirana, thank you. Now let us expand this discussion to the entire world. Can you tell us about international poverty?
Yeah. Internationally, poverty also, you will see the same criteria is used to measure the incidence of poverty in various countries. And we will see that most of the people in the poor countries are, unfortunately, when I say poor, it's underdeveloped or developing countries are poor. And the figures that we have shown has already told you that in some of these countries, the incidence of poverty has been around 50% of the population or 40% of the population. If it is 50%, as we said earlier, every second person in the street is poor. If it is 30%, every third person on the street is poor. If it is 20%, every fourth person in the street or fifth person in the street is poor. So that is what matters to us in terms of global poverty. And a lot of these incidents occur in the so-called, or not so-called, the real developing countries that are located in the third world, which is Africa, Latin America, and South Asia.
So, what are the measurements of poverty?
Well, I think the head count index that we discussed earlier is a measurement of poverty, right? It also has another measure which is known as poverty gap index. We will see some of the figures, some of the data for Sri Lanka, if I am permitted to do that. You have seen the poverty that is measured for Sri Lanka from 1990 to 2010 or 2009 and 10 has shown that at national level, the head count poverty has been earlier, which was around 25 to 26%. In 1995, it was almost 30%, has come down to roughly about 9% by 2009. That's national level. In the estate, of course, the third sector in the country, in the estate sector, where we have tea produced, the rubber is produced, where you have large number of indented labor earlier. Now they are not anymore indented labor. The ratio has been around 30% after 2005. It has also fallen recently. Rural sector, also the poverty has fallen. Urban sector is a place where you have the poverty falling continuously from 16% in 1990 to almost 5% in 2009. So poverty in Sri Lanka on the average has been falling, declining in all sectors, in the rural sector, in the urban sector in particular, in estate sector as well. There has been some vicissitudes, some fluctuations, but if you have a long-term trend line, even in the estate sector, poverty has been falling.
Right. Talking further about Sri Lanka, Prof. Vidanapathirana, could you tell us briefly what are the trends of poverty in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, the trends of poverty in Sri Lanka, as we said earlier, poverty has been declining continuously over the years from 1990 to 2010, and most of the poverty decline has been in the urban sector, and also there has been relatively persistent poverty decline in the rural sector, and estate sector. The situation has not been very favorable. It in fact has been stable up to 2005.
So tell us, why did poverty decline nationally?
Yeah, poverty declines nationally. Basically, when a country grows, poverty declines. One reason, the GDP has to grow. Second reason, with the GDP growth, I think we discussed it somewhere else, or we may be discussing it later, that not only the GDP must grow, but there has to be equity in the distribution of GDP. That is, you should not have few rich and more poor, but we should have a large number of poor people, the number of poor people falling. That is poverty declining. So two considerations matter most in terms of head count poverty declining. One is the country must grow, progress. Second, the country's equity in income distribution also must show a trend towards equity, and inequality has to be removed. That, I think, those things we'll discuss later.
Yeah, which brings me to the next question. What are the modern views on poverty?
Yeah, we look at the income measures, the monetary measures. The modern measures of poverty are based on the poverty as lack of well-being. Now, this question of well-being was brought to the notice of development writers by this gentleman called Amartya Sen, and he identified poverty as a profound deprivation of capabilities. Now, what is a capability? Capability is one's capacity to respond to the workplace necessities, to the work environment necessities, to respond to productivity, which can be done if you are educated, if you are healthy, if you are given the other basic requirements, then you can do better in the workplace. So workplace betterment makes capabilities, and if you don't have them, it's a capability deprivation. So poverty is known in the modern world as profound deprivation of capabilities. Another modern idea is the social exclusion. That is, if some people are excluded from the economic activities of a country, or social activities of a country, or political activities of a country, that's known as exclusion. But also, this has two aspects. One is the real exclusion, other one is a perceived exclusion. The real exclusion is really people are excluded. For instance, estate workers up to a particular point in time have been excluded really. But when the real exclusion exists for some time, then those people who have been excluded might perceive that the exclusion is still there. So that is perceived exclusion. Whether it's perceived exclusion or real exclusion, that leads to a concept called social exclusion, that you are not in the mainstream development process of a country. So that is one of the other modern views.
Yeah, which brings to my next question. What are deprivation domains?
Yeah, you have a number of deprivation domains. As we said earlier, income is an important deprivation domain. That is, if you don't have sufficient income, the income threshold, you cannot buy food, you cannot buy a nutritious meal, you cannot buy your medicine, so you have to delay your eating, hunger, you have to delay your medical requirements, which is a deprivation. Another deprivation is employment. If you are unemployed, you are deprived. If you are unemployed, you have no way of earning an income. So it's another deprivation. Related to that could be low wage rate, is also deprivation. Also, maybe you can have underemployment, where people who do not get sufficient number of hours to work or sufficient sufficiently good work type for that person that meets the person's educational and other expectations. For instance, medical doctor is asked to do a nurse's job, can be an underemployment. A graduate is asked to do something else which can be performed by a non-graduate, can be inferred as underemployment.
Tell us about human poverty. What is human poverty?
Yeah, human poverty is it measures the poverty of human beings using two criteria. This criterion was developed by, I think, UNDP. The first criteria is known as HPI-1 and the second criteria is known as HPI-2. HPI-1 is for low-income countries, and it has taken into account 4 domains, or rather 3 domains. What are the 3 domains? One is probability of people who cannot survive to age 40, which is known as longevity. Right? How many years a person who is born today will live? If that is lower than 40 years of age, that is the first criteria. The probability, high probability of that is the first criteria. Second criteria is the adult lacking functional literacy skills and school education. Third one is population not using improved water resources, and also a lot of people who are under age 5 who are underweight. If you combine all 3 of them, each criteria is given 1/3 weight, and then you will get a total composite figure of HPI poverty or human poverty. And HPI-2 has added, this was done in 2002 UNDP report, page 254 I think, and HPI-2 has included the social exclusion that we discussed earlier. That also was taken into one. That's why it has 4 variables, and exclusion is measured in terms of unemployment. So those are this is actually the criteria used to measure the human poverty.
Yeah, tell us about multidimensional poverty index.
Yeah,
what is that?
This was developed by the Oxford, it developed in 2010 by the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative of the UNDP development program. It uses 10 factors to determine poverty and replace the previous Human Development Index. It has taken into consideration 10 factors. So MPI shows a number of people who are multidimensionally poor, not that one dimension of income, not 3 dimensions of longevity, income and something else. It has 10 dimensions. It reflects the deprivation of core human functionings for people across 104 countries. I'm a little fast now, right? MPI reveals that the highest value of MPI is, I think, not the highest value, the worst value of MPI is 0.6, which is Niger, the poorest country in the world in terms of multidimensional poverty. If you want to have some comparison, India's multidimensional poverty was 0.28, China 0.056, Sri Lanka 0.02. Those are some of the figures to tell you about the multidimensional poverty. Now the dimensions are health, education, living standard, under which you have different things like under health you have child mortality and nutrition, education, years of schooling and children employment, enrollment, living standards including cooking fuel, toilet water, electricity, floor area and assets.
Right. Professor Vidanapathirana, to conclude this session, could you give us a brief summary of your lecture today?
But I think of the measures that we have discussed, to me, I think poverty is the profound deprivation. Whether it is Human Development Poverty 1, Human Development Poverty 2 or multidimensional poverty, we discuss about deprivation. So it's It's profound deprivation, and its effects are global, national, local, domestic. You can see it everywhere. Income poverty measurement includes headcount poverty, poverty gap. We need to discuss that. There's another thing called squared poverty. We need to discuss that. You have them in your book, and also in the slides you might get them. Other indicators like human poverty and animal poverty also are there. They have expanded the kind of scope of poverty measurement, and deprivations may be evident in few major areas as we discussed earlier.
Right. Thank you, Professor Vidanapathirana. That concludes the session 4 of Development Economics, the meaning of poverty. As always, let me remind you, please read the relevant session in your textbook so that you can consolidate this knowledge. Thank you.